Welcome back to Smarter Markets at FIA Boca. I'm joined by Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink, and thanks for taking the time to sit down with us. It's been a busy couple days here in Boca. I was hoping for our audience, you might start us off by just giving us a little bit of an introduction to Chainlink and what you see your role as in the markets.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. So Chainlink is a data transport layer and a connectivity layer for blockchains. So Chainlink is responsible for providing data into blockchains, pulling information out of blockchains, and connecting blockchains between themselves. And this is particularly important if you're going to make on-chain financial products. Mm-hmm. So Chainlink powers the majority of DeFi, which is the public chain version of financial products that is now going to be made in the private capital markets in the same kind of technical model, in the same fundamentals. But it's just going to be called other things like real-world asset tokenization or digital assets. Okay. So Chainlink powers the majority of DeFi through data, and in the capital markets, we're known for our cross-chain connectivity and the ability for contracts and assets to move across chains, which is also very important for basically liquidity to gain access to whatever tokenized asset you happen to put out on your own chain.
And I've noticed there's a lot of technology companies at the conference this year, probably more than in prior years. What made you decide that this was a place you wanted to be?
So I think there's really the biggest financial market infrastructure players here at this conference. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a real uptake in the amount of data that needs to flow onto blockchains, and also a greater fragmentation of chains. And I think these financial market infrastructures are seeing the same thing. And so they're actually interested in finding ways to solve that. And I think they're finding their way to Chainlink because it's the most widely used, most secure way to do that as a data layer and a connectivity layer to and from blockchains, because the system's been live on production for many years without losing value, and because it's enabled over 10 trillion in transaction value. So we're kind of here looking to interact with more and more players in the financial market infrastructure community. And we already work with a number of them, because what we're really kind of working towards is creating a single global open standard for data transmission and connectivity into, out of, and between blockchains.
Oh, I want to ask you about building a global standard, but first I was just curious, of the types of market participants that are here, what are the ones that you most naturally work with and partner with?
I think CSDs have a big role to play in creating legal finality. So we work with, or are starting to work with, more and more CSDs on how can the legal finality that they provide be applied to blockchain transactions. Okay. Then there are a number of exchange infrastructures that have various data that needs to flow into blockchains for transactions to happen. And then there's identity providers. But basically, I think all FMIs will have a role to play in the new blockchain infrastructure world, because they allow transactions to be compliant, which is a hard requirement for those transactions to continue. And then they have various other services like data services, identity services, and so on, which Chainlink is the best way to get that data and those services connected to smart contracts.
And when you talked about building out some global standards, how difficult is that? How difficult is it to get an industry with a lot of diverse types of participants to kind of agree on a common standard, or do you even need agreement for it to become more common?
So I think there are already a number of standards generated by Swift, generated by Fix, generated by FPML, generated by a number of different methods that people have to define transactions. The global standard that we're talking about is how do on-chain contracts receive data, and how do they interact with each other across chains. This is kind of the final step in what needs to get defined as a standard in order for blockchain transactions to really progress to the next stage of their evolution. And our approach is not to replace the existing standards of the financial system, but to leverage them and to use them as something that's translated into blockchain events. The translation into blockchain events is really the thing that's complicated, whether that's for the input of data, or whether that's the connectivity to existing systems like Swift private keys, or whether that's connectivity between chains. The standards to define transactions and define counterparty relationships and provide legal finality and compliance, those exist. The challenge is really converting them into an on-chain state that can be utilized in an efficient, secure, compliant way for all of these market participants. So that's the very specific technical standard that we're focused on.
Okay. And when you're talking with traditional financial market participants, often adopting new technology is a big lift for them, moving from internal systems, moving from existing ways of doing things. What do you see as some of the things that get them excited, get them moving to adopt a new technology, like putting things on chain? Is it external forces that are making it, or just the efficiencies so apparent that alone gets them to move?
Yeah, so it's mainly three things, split up between, as usual, the front office interests and the back office interests of these institutions. The front office interests are around those new markets and the opportunity of real-world assets, tokenizing categories of assets that weren't previously easily accessible, creating more fractional ownership in certain things like real estate or carbon credits or something, or even tokenizing money market funds and others, right? So there's the first market kind of push towards those things, towards new markets, new opportunities. There's two others which mainly relate to the back office. The first one on the back office is really collateral management and the efficiency of how collateral moves across the markets in a way that allows you to earn interest on your collateral for longer without having to cede control over it to others for extended periods of time. And when you're dealing with hundreds of billions of dollars, even 1 or 2 days of that collateral or that asset or that value not being in your position is not good. So that capital efficiency is a big thing. And then risk management is the third one. And this is where the creation of what we call a unified golden record. So basically a smart contract that has all of this data inside of it that anyone who has it can read from, right? So all of the information you need about an asset can reside in a single smart contract. And that is both information you need to process that asset correctly, like identity information, various pieces of information that allow the transaction to happen. But then you can also add information that allows you to manage risk, such as, has anything changed with the asset? Is anything going wrong with it? Has the value of the asset decreased? Has there been any event related to the asset that creates additional risk? All of this information can also go in there. And now you have a single place where anyone who has the asset or wants to buy the asset can look without having to go around 50 data sources and talk to the initial issuer. And this is really beneficial for rapid risk management, which is really the story of many market failures, is that you couldn't do both long-term risk management and really rapid risk management when things started to change.
Yeah. Are there certain use cases amongst those that you mentioned that you find are ones where companies are willing to dive in more quickly and adopt?
Sure, so carbon credits is a good use case.
Okay.
Carbon credits is a relatively new asset class, so it doesn't have a lot of existing methods to transact or standards. Mm-hmm. It's also something where the capital markets have both a big social pressure to be part of it and a big economic pressure, because the economics there are continuing to be more and more attractive, like there's growth there. And then I would say the other thing is that the tokenization of carbon credits is actually something very positive for how they can be transacted. And the unified golden record approach of putting data into a single data container is useful for carbon credits because there isn't a lot of information to prove the quality of carbon credits in an easily accessible way. And the quality of carbon credits has come under question, so the more information you can provide about the quality of a carbon credit in a secure, efficient way, the more likely it is that someone will buy it. So there's actually a relationship now between the quality of the data of the asset and the attractiveness of the asset in the market, which is actually the fundamental thesis we have about why tokenized assets are good, but also why tokenized assets with a lot of data inside of them are good. Other than that, I would say it's asset classes that have been traditionally hard to gain access to. So private equity is a good example. Direct ownership of real estate that's made more fractionally owned, because you can tokenize the real estate and create fractional pieces of it, and that gives liquidity to the real estate holder, while giving people exposure to the value of the real estate in ways that REITs and other things don't. So I would say there's all these assets at the edges. Then there's also the tokenization of treasuries, mutual funds, core kind of financial products in the financial system. That is also happening.
Yeah, I was curious. There's a lot of talk in the conference about the move with the SEC to clear treasuries. Are you seeing any opportunities or challenges in that space?
I think there are going to be a number of asset managers that tokenize money markets, tokenize various forms of treasury ownership. I'm definitely seeing that direction. That's because it's a very widely desired form of collateral, basically, that people want to have on hand. And so the demand, I think, will pull the existence of tokenized treasuries out of the traditional capital markets more and more. That's a different opportunity than the stuff at the edges, right? So the stuff at the edges is net new markets. Tokenized treasuries, tokenized money market funds, I think is really partly the capital efficiency, and partly that there are people that want to hold it in the tokenized form. So yeah, I am seeing some more movement in that direction.
Right. And I'm curious, with the meetings you've had at the conference, the panel sessions, are there any ideas that have kind of struck you as something interesting, something insightful, or even surprising?
I think I'm having a lot of meetings where people are basically agreeing to two things that they historically haven't agreed to. One is that tokenization is definitely going to happen across the financial markets, that a lot of assets are going to become tokenized. I think they've seen enough of their clients come to them now and say, I want access to tokenized assets. And then the second one is, there was previously a belief that either I don't need a chain, or there's going to be a single chain that I'll just join. Now it's very clear that everyone's belief is there's going to be a multitude of different chains. I'm going to have my own chain. It's possible I'll have to have multiple chains. And that gives birth to the problem of connectivity, right? Of how do I connect all of those chains into what we call a single internet of contracts. So in previous years, when I've talked to folks, there's been doubt about both of these points. Basically everyone I've met, now those points are pretty clear. And the digital asset employees that people have, because there are now dedicated digital asset team members, which didn't exist before, are pretty focused on both generating those tokenized assets, finding ways to make them more robust with greater amounts of data so that they can be viewed as better assets than assets without data inside of them. And then the connectivity to liquidity question. So all of those kind of questions, I think, are now being taken very seriously.
And one last question before I let you get back. If you think about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities of putting the chains to work for the financial service space, financial institutions, what do you think the financial industry as a whole needs to be doing to meet some of those challenges and take advantage of the opportunity?
Sure, so there's a lot of value in the capital markets. Really the most value in the world is in these markets and these institutions. I think they have to meet certain compliance and legal requirements that blockchains don't yet fully meet for them, and that Oracle networks and smart contracts are gradually being made to meet. So these are things like legal finality, compliance, identity. These questions are necessary conditions, hard conditions for value to flow from the capital markets into a blockchain format. Part of that depends on clarity on what those legal conditions are. Part of it depends on the connectivity of systems to blockchains to provide that data into blockchains. And part of it is basically the ability to make smart contracts that can represent all the necessary value, all the necessary data to prove that they're compliant, right? So you basically need to make smart contracts compliant according to the requirements that in some places are clear, in some places are not as clear. Once that clarity increases, and once you have smart contracts, which is what we're working on with a number of institutions that are able to comply with these various requirements, then the risk of putting value into these contracts will go completely down to zero or near zero. But the value of of tokenizing things and the value of putting value into these contracts will only continue to grow. So that is really the headwind. It's the compliance, legal risk, legal finality risk of tokenizing things versus the current system that doesn't have that risk, that needs to be removed down to zero, because the smart contracts work in a way that's compliant, compatible with identity requirements, compatible with legal finality requirements. That does also require that some of those things be made more clear, but there is enough there that you can already start making smart contracts that have AML KYC connectivity so that you can prove the identity of the person who's sending it. You can prove out other things about it that can meet the standards that they need to meet. That is really the final hurdle, I think. And that's something we're working on very actively to create a pathway for all of this value to flow into blockchains and across blockchains, because the necessary data and the necessary connectivity and the necessary interface with all of these legal questions is also done correctly.
It's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing the reviews of the future with us, and we really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.